I'll start with defining the victim mentality. That way we have a reference point to compare. So the victim mentality is an acquired personality trait in which a person tends to regard himself or herself as the victim of other people's actions, even in the absence of clear evidence. The victim mentality depends on a habitual thought process and attributions. So to be a victim or is a habit. It's something that we have attributed.
Well, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here, Mark. I am very grateful to be here.
Happy to have you here, my friend. Welcome to Peak Performance Perspective, where we help entrepreneurs master health, wealth, and relationships. I have to start out by asking, what does peak performance mean to you?
Peak performance to me means having the desire to create self-discipline rather than self-suppression. Peak performance is removing the resistance of the negative narratives within our mind in order to make us action prone towards doing the things that'll, one, get us to become who we want to be in order to get the things that we want.
Is it easy to decide who do we want to be?
Yes, I would say so, because if you ask the question, who do you want to be, people will list off very quickly what they don't want to be.
Or do you
So
find it
then it's
most
just,
people, when they list it up, they're talking about what they want to have?
oh yeah, yeah. They'll go with what they want before they go with who they are, without a doubt. Yeah, and it's really
Most
good
people
too.
say, I want to be fit, I want to be rich, I want to be in a great relationship. How would you go about transforming that into the who you want to be component?
I would break it down to I would break it down to writing down the story of what they want, whether it's past tense, as in they've already done it, present tense, as they are currently doing it, or future tense, as they are going to do it. So I would start with the story of what they want. And then at the end of the story, after we bring some feels into it, I would ask them, what does this story mean about the person that would accomplish it? What characteristics and behaviors does this person have? Because they're seeing themselves in a sense of what they want, and there's that cognitive disconnect between who they are, where they want to be. And so when we get those things lined up, then it's easier to make the decision to do the thing.
You have developed something called neuro linguistic somatic experience, or NLSE. Before we deep dive into it, can you quickly tell the audience what that is?
Yes, absolutely. So NLSE is a practice that I've developed both in my own self. So I started with developing my own self. And then over time, as I've been able to work better with my stories and my words, and then as a side effect of that, developing self-respect, competence. And as a side effect of competence, I've developed confidence. So it started with me making my own changes where I was someone that I did not very much appreciate my company. So I wanted to change my company. I wanted to become someone better. And so that's the first part of where NLC came from, was my own changes from going from, in my own opinion, a loser, someone that I did not admire, did not respect, that I was not honest with, I lied to, I disrespected, and I did not show up for. I did not want to be. So that's like what we were saying before. Those are the characteristics I don't want. So then it flips to the other side. What are the characteristics that I do want? And so that's where I started developing it. And then it was a client that I had who was a very pivotal client. And I'd like to frame it as him and I were a solid coaching client. And we were also really good when it came to like relations. Like we had a good rapport, really good connection. And when we were talking, the highlights, the ahas were coming out. And now that's a focus of my work, is collecting as many ahas as possible, as many pattern interrupts, as many connections in the mind. So when we were having this conversation, when we were conversing, we were like crushing it. And then also for context, prior to this, I was in the fitness industry for 13 years and I was an online fitness coach and trainer. And so I had my program. And then this fellow was in and we were both flustered. We were both frustrated. And it wasn't the practice and it wasn't the people. It was the communicate. I guess it was the people. It wasn't the practice. It was the people, because the communication wasn't there. And so we had a little bit of a falling out. And then I reflected on it and I was concerned, because if you have a client, or for me, when I have a client that has the potential and then is not able to go into it, then I think, what is it about the practice that I got incorrect? So the following client, I kid you not, the following client was almost like a side-by-side duplicate of this guy. And like emergency services, they were both wanting the same goals. The difference is that one of them, the first client, was a younger fella than the new client. He was an older fella. Both of them were bald. Like they were honestly side by side. You're going to, and that's your future. Like you look exactly the same. So then him and I started working together. And I was really focused. I'm like, where is the issue with the practice? And there's no issue. He lost 50 pounds within 3 months and absolutely slayed it. So then I reflected on that. Okay, if it wasn't the practice, then it was communication. It was on me. I did not communicate enough in order for him to gain a higher perspective, an objective perspective. And so then I went into figuring out how to communicate better, how to communicate properly, how to articulate my own thoughts in order to be able to explain it to another person. And that got me into the realm of work that I'm working with now, where it's the words and stories and breath. Those are the three main things that I focus on with all my clients, because I like to bring it down to the simple parts. So then that got me into learning about human behavior, cognitive well-being, rather than saying, and mental health as well, but rather than saying mental health, I like to say mental fitness, because mental fitness embodies both health and unhealth. And I believe that if we're focusing mostly on mental health, then we're ignoring what's making us unhealthy. Mental fitness has a range. It could be higher or it could be lesser. And so I like to go with mental fitness for that. So human behavior, mental fitness, neuropsychology, and psychology and self. So both of them separate and then together. And after that point, while I was doing my own podcasts, I was introduced to a fellow named Mark England, and he is the founder of what is known as the Enlifted Method, ENLIFTED. And they're based out of Richmond, Virginia. And I know you're out of Austin. That's where I went down to Austin. They did an annual event, so I was hanging out there with them. And that's where I learned how to dive into the words and the stories that make up our perception of reality, or it frames how we view reality. So I can go into a woo vibe, or I can go into a psychology vibe. So I can speak both languages in that one. And then all through this time, I've been doing breath work for over a decade now. And I combined words, stories, and breath. So there's the breath work, then there's the story work, put it together, and I've developed NLSE. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt that working with clients with NLSE and seeing the changes and the shifts, it's interesting because I'm not in the fitness realm anymore. However, I'm decreasing people's resistance to their fitness, or to their work, or to their health, wealth, and relationships. Or I like to call it my 4Fs of fate, where there's fitness, physical and mental. Then there's finance, whether you're saving up or paying off or investing. And then there's fellowship, the people we make space for. And then there's our fulfillment, the things that we really want to pursue for self-actualization. And as I decrease the resistance, or actually as I facilitated the set and setting for a person to explore their stories and decrease their own resistance, now people are just willy-nilly going for walks. There's no resistance to doing walks. There's no resistance to going to the gym. It's taking those stories of anxieties and decreasing it, or taking those stories of amazing and increasing it. And so that's how I came up. That's the timeline of how I came up with NLSE. I would say that frame would be from 2016 to working on it from 2016 till now, where I'm finally sharing it.
You mentioned that there was a time when you just didn't like your own company. What was going on in life at the time?
So one would be, I understood, what was going on at the time? I was just making poor decisions. And those poor decisions were very much a projection of my reflection. So I was projecting my poor relationship with myself onto the relationships around me. And so during that particular time, I was not only emotionally suffering myself, but I was also, as a side effect, inspiring suffering in others. And I just didn't want to do that, because I've always had an intuitive pull towards helping people. That's where, my very first gig, I was in the restaurant industry from the age of 15. From 15, 5 years, 3 months, and 14 days, boom. And then I got into personal training. And that followed that intuitive pull of wanting to help people. So I had that while still not helping myself. And I believe that was the disconnect. So there's lying, cheating, manipulation. It was just I didn't like my character. And so I wanted to make a pivot to that. And something that I think of that inspires me is I have a thought on Gandhi, which is pretty cool. And what folks don't know about Gandhi is, prior to him being the peaceful protester, he was in the British military, and he was high up on there. He was like Navy SEALs-esque, to my knowledge. I could be incorrect, but to my knowledge, he was in the Navy SEALs and stuff like that. And even till his dying day, he still believed he didn't do enough for the British military, for the British Empire at that time. So he was doing quite a bit of warmongering. And what that lesson, or what that observation brings to the forefront with me, is, in order for Gandhi to have understood his capacity for peace, he had to understand his capacity for violence. And so with that same frame, I understand my capacity for violence, or not even violence, but just being crappy. And now it's on the polar opposite end where my capacity for abundance, fulfillment, joy, respect, and creation is much more prominent.
Lying, cheating, manipulation, this version of yourself that you're describing, almost always those things are beneficial to one. And that's why they stick around with it. What was your
Totally.
breaking point? What was the
Uh,
pivotal moment that you said, yeah, these things are serving me and I'm getting what I want, but I don't want to be this person anymore?
I believe it was the intentionality behind the use, where it was for my own self-interest. So what was going on at that point was I was in a relationship, and then I was not the best in the relationship, and then there's a split where I was seeing someone else, and then from there that split, and then everyone was just done with it. So I was done with it completely. So when I was out of it, I still to this day have just never looked back at that point. I've went into it, experienced it, pulled out of it, and now that I have a much more elevated space, I can see where I don't want to be with that. It was relational where I was the instigator of broken hearts, others and my own. And that goes, even at that point in time, it went in opposition to my personal value system. And that's another aspect as well, where I had no respect because I wasn't even living in alignment with what I had for standards.
What were those standards at the time?
Oh, the standards I hold now: honesty, openness, abundance, showing up, being able to develop fortitude, strength, and resilience, putting purpose and intention prior to or before passive enjoyment or entertainment. What other standards do I have? My main standard that I hold myself to is my mission, which is the persistent pursuit of self-betterment and to be a positive contribution to the human race and to be a sovereign, savage servant. And so at that point in time, I wasn't a positive contribution to me. I wasn't a positive contribution to the human race at that time. And I was definitely not sovereign. I was dependent. I was definitely not a savage. I was a creature of whim rather than a being of will. And the only servant I was to impulse. And yeah, that's not cool.
So many people find themselves in a place in life where, they are not liking who they are. But they make excuses. They blame it on their past. They blame it on their upbringing. They blame it on their parenting. They blame it on the society. In some way or form, we want to believe that we are a victim because there's comfort in believing that we are a victim. You talk about defeating the victim mentality a lot. Can you explain how you see victim mentality and how it impacts people's lives?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'll start with defining the victim mentality. That way we have a reference point to compare. So the victim mentality is an acquired personality trait in which a person tends to regard himself or herself as the victim of other people's actions, even in the absence of clear evidence. The victim mentality depends on a habitual thought process and attributions. So to be a victim is a habit. It's something that we have attributed. It's something that's the victim mentality.
Even when you say, even in the absence of
Clear
proof,
evidence.
what about those who have proof? There are people who grew up with horrible parents, and there are people who have been in horrible relationships, and they stick to that story. So there is proof.
Yes.
So is their feeling of being a victim justified?
This may be controversial, but I would say no. And the reason being is that also, that was such a great question. That was so well worded, smooth. So I would actually say that no, they are not justified. And in saying that, as a projection reflection, I would not be justified in believing that. So the thing about the victim mentality is that it's something that is maintained after the victimization has happened. For example, you had a reference point of parents. Are the parents to this day still doing the same things that they did then? Because then that's evidence. Because if it's done today, there's evidence of it happening in the moment. However, if something's done in the past and the experience has happened, right? The experience is gone. It's already happened. It's in the past. Anything that's past that point is maintained by ourselves, either unconsciously, consciously, either consciously, subconsciously, or unconsciously. It's held in here. And so when we're feeling something from the past or the future, because we can feel it in either direction within the present, we're pulling stories, because you mentioned stories as well there. So we're pulling stories from the past and feeling it in the present. And a lot of times stories have themes. So a perfect example, I think most people have experienced this one or have had a friend experience it, where a friend of yours dates 10 different people. However, there's the same theme across the board. The common denominator within those 10 people is the one person picking those 10.
So how do we get over it? Because sometimes these traumas that we have experienced are so strong. Nobody wakes up in the morning and chooses to be miserable. Nobody wakes up in a moment and decides, I'm feeling pretty good. I want to be anxious right now. Right? How do we get over that?
So I would say going with the particular stories, this is what I actually share with folks. When I'm working with someone, I recommend putting the gorilla on the table. So going with the heaviest hitting story, period. If folks are open to exploring that, then I'm totally cool with that. I will never explore a story that someone doesn't want to. You cannot pay me $1 million to go into a story that someone does not want to go into, because they're going to be resistant to it. It's not going to happen. So let's say in the direction where someone's okay with going with the heavy hitter story, what will happen is we dive into the story, and I'll just tell the process too, because it's just going to be simpler. And I would love whoever's listening to this, including you, Mark, bro, if you do this, actually, we can just do it like another time too. Please shoot me a message and let me know what the highlight of the experience was. So the process, I like to go with the heavy hitter story for more context before the process. I like to go with the heavy hitter story because it creates an opening for more emotion, energy in motion to flow through the system. And the way that I like to visualize this is, let's say the river, and there's a couple lumberjacks that are taking logs out of the river and they're putting it into the sawmill. They take those logs, stories, right? Put it into the sawmill, create the lumber, and then they can build whatever they want from there. It could be a house, it could be chairs, it could be whatever. But it starts with the stories, and it starts with the stories. So then the logs are coming down the river, lumberjacks are taking them out, and it's all willy-nilly, super simple, all goods. And then over time, they see that the water level is coming down a little bit. And they're like, okay, yeah, sure, that's all right. Like, no biggie. Less logs are coming down. Okay, this is starting to affect what we can create. This is a little bit, okay. And then one day, they'll come down, show up for work, and the river's going to be dry. There's not going to be any logs coming down. And what I find is many folks will say, oh, someone turned off the tap. Let's just go to the bar and have a beer. Rather than think, oh, why is the flow of energy? What is the flow of water? Why is it stopped? So that's when I come in. We go upstream and we look for these dammed up blockages. And these blockages are logs. And starting with something simple, then we take a log out and it creates the flow. And that's just one aspect. That's one blockage of emotion that's just in the gut. Like, people feel it, that resistance. They feel it in the throat if they want to say something and they're not. They'll feel it in the solar plexus if they're doing the opposite of what they intend to do. And so I think going right up to go to the highest, most amount of blockage that's going on. And then we'll take out the stories and de-intensify or decrease the intensity of those stories in order to get a lot more flow. And once that big dam is just broken apart, it creates a flow where the rest is just going to fall into place. So for folks to really pull the most out of their stories and to develop themselves, an openness is definitely up there. An openness to explore specifically, where if they're really stuck in what they believe to be correct, then they're going to be limited to their beliefs at that time, and they're just going to maintain it. So if someone doesn't have a desire to explore, they're just going to stay exactly where they are for the rest of the time until either by choice or chance, they decide to make a pivot. And an openness to explore, a desirability, a true, sincere desire to make changes, and then an okayness with testing a pain threshold. So those are the three things that people get the most out of it. So the more that people are willing to be open, more desire, and okay with pain, the further upstream we can go to hit the stories from childhood traumas. And when we hit those childhood traumas, then we can alleviate the emotions from it. And when we alleviate those emotions, then there's more objectivity, there's more peace. It happened, yes. It doesn't impact me anymore. And so by creating that objectivity, that distance, then that trauma goes from a trauma to a healing, to a healed. And so that way you can feel it real time going through it. So it's really fast changes. And it's crazy. It's crazy, man. I've seen some pretty gnarly experiences from myself and then also for others too.
When you say high pain threshold, what type of pain are we talking about?
Emotional. So for example, we want to do, I'll use fitness references because it'll be easy. So you want to go to the gym, start with 3 times per week. The person's gung ho. They absolutely want to make changes for themselves, and they feel an emotional resistance, a pain that is up in the body. And people will say no to themselves in order to alleviate that pain rather than pushing into that pain, because conceptually that's all it is. It's only conceptual pain. It's not real physiological pain. We feel it, but it's not like we're getting stabbed. We're not having a broken leg. And so when people push into that resistance, that creates pain that we are using against our older self, our old identity, because our old identity doesn't want to die. And so that pain that we feel, that emotional constipation that we feel, is our current self trying to maintain its survival. We have to create that pain in order to push into that threshold, in order to forge us into something that is awesome. And I shared it with you before, where pain is the blacksmith that forges us into the ultimate weapon. So the more someone is willing to test that pain threshold and view that pain as good rather than negative, and observe stress as positive rather than negative, then we can, and so that resistance is our old self not wanting to die and doing what we do in order to get to where we want to go, inflicts pain on that past self in order for our authentic self, the person that we want to be, to come out and flourish. And so it's who's going to win the battle of the pain. Is it going to be the lesser self or the inner rival, or is it going to be the higher self or the inner role model? And then we can make decisions based off of those two archetypes.
What about
Yeah.
fear? Because so many of the traumas, for those who are living with them, for those they have lived with them for decades, while there is extreme discomfort and anxiety and all of those things in it, there is a comfort of familiarity. Sometimes they have gotten so used to living with a certain type of trauma, certain type of emotional pain, that what life would be like in the absence of that mechanism is darn scary. You mentioned identity. Living with the trauma becomes one's identity. So when you're talking about dealing with the issues, dealing with the stories, feeling the pain, wanting to do the work, that all goes in the realm of willpower, our willingness to do something about it. But what about the unwillingness, because we're just afraid of what lies on the other side? I don't know who I'm going to be if I don't have this trauma blanket around me all the time. How do you go about helping get over that fear of uncertainty?
I love this conversation, dude. I'll start with how I frame fear. I frame fear as an acronym: false evidence appearing real. There's no external fear, it's conceptual fear. So it's imaginative fear. It's fear that doesn't actually exist out here. It's all in here, or it's all in here. And so with someone that doesn't have the willingness to change, they just won't. That's simple. They can have their trauma blanket, which I love that term. I'm going to put in my back pocket. So good. They want to keep that trauma blanket, and that's okay. Like, everyone has the ability to choose. And if someone wants that, then they absolutely can. For folks that want an alternate path, there's either going to be a circumstance where it's either going to be by choice or by chance. So I mentioned that earlier. I'll talk about that too, where things will happen in our lifetime, either happenstance or purposefully, passively or actively. So if a particular life event happens, then we have the choice. Now, let me reframe it. Let's go with fitness again. Someone for 6 years is saying, I want to lose weight. They still choose not to lose the weight, right? So that's choice. They had all that time to choose. They chose not to. 6 years later, by chance, they check out their health, and they're like, wow, okay, I'm going to go extreme with this. I'm going to die. If I don't make changes, I'm going to die. So that's by chance. So either by choice or by chance, where something happens and then we make the change, then we are forced to make the decision, or by choice, where we are more preemptive, proactive. We can actually do it in advance. Either by choice or by chance, people have the opportunity to make pivots. So it depends on where they get their inspiration from. So for me, there was this fear of being seen. And what I realized that is authenticity is saying and doing and thinking the exact same things in public as you do in private. So when it comes to an individual wanting to remove that trauma blanket, then what we'll do is break down the stories. It really comes down to the willingness of the individual. Because if a person is not willing to want to change, then they're just simply not going to. And I'm not going to try to convince them otherwise, because that's their frame. That's how they believe. I can introduce a different frame of thinking where it is simply conceptual. It's not real. It's imaginary. And I think that hanging out with the devil in contrast to the devil you don't know, I think that there's only the devil, man, on that one. It's hanging out with the devil when it's not giving yourself the opportunity to be able to step into that possibility. Does that make sense?
What about the minutia of life? I know there are people listening to this and saying, Kyle, all these things you're saying, they sound really good. But as a fat man, as a fat woman, I want to change. I'm trying diet after diet. Things are just not working out. Or my work life or my family life is such that I just can't go to the gym X number of hours a day. There are people listening to this and saying, it's just not right, Kyle. Like my life is such, my job is such that it stokes that anxiety that I live with. I'm not choosing to be miserable. How would you tear past that veil? Because I don't know many people who say truly, honestly, I don't have any excuses and don't change. Almost everybody who accepts that these are excuses automatically changes. So that's not even part of the crowd we're speaking to, right? We're speaking to the people who have real problems. In this example, the minutia of life that gets in the way. How do you help them become that person who can stick to what they just decided a little while ago and not move up from it, move off of it?
Ooh, let me make sure I got this one right. So for the folks that are handling the daily minutia of and they're bringing in the excuses in order to prevent themselves from progressing.
The daily minutia get in life. I'm somebody who's anxious all the time, and my job is such. I'm working in sales, and sales is an anxiety-driving profession.
Yeah.
So I'm saying I want to change. I don't want to be anxious anymore. But the minutia of life is getting in my way. I am overweight, but I have a job where I have to wine and dine other people. I am someone who has a bunch of kids and a wife to take care of, and I just can't get to the things that I want to get to. And they are saying it's not just the willpower, Kyle. There's other things in my life that's stopping me. How do we help them progress?
I'm going to start with breaking down anxiety as well, because I think that the anxiety there's actually 2 or 3 points to it. So I would say that there's anxiety in the form of the anticipation of future pain. So that's causing us stress in the present, which is us projecting our imagination into the future of what could happen and then bringing it back and then either using that to inspire or discourage us. And I believe that there may be that aspect for many folks where it's the anxiety of whatever could happen. And then I would also say that the second aspect of anxiety is that it is a incongruence between who you are and what you want to do. So when we are incongruent with what we say, think, and do, then we are an imposter and we're actually not showing up as the person that we say we are. So when we feel anxiety, it could be the anticipation of future fear or pain. Now, if it's not that, how are we behaving incongruent to who we want to be? So that's another aspect of anxiety. And then the third aspect of anxiety that I like to think of as well is the idea that anxiety, because Mark, list the physiological side effects, the symptoms when you feel anxiety. What do you feel?
Heart fluttering, sinking feeling in your stomach, just stress, fear, wanting to curl up.
And then pupil dilation. I know you can't see your own pupils, but that's a thing too. I'll put this as a frame. So when we were kids, we're getting in line for a roller coaster and we feel those physiological symptoms that I feel them too. Every human being feels them. Then we have 2 adults. One adult says, oh, you're experiencing fear and anxiety. So now that kid can adopt that story, and every time they feel those particular sensations, they're going to attribute it with a negative. Now the other adult says, oh, you're feeling excitement, because anxiety has the exact same physiological symptoms in either case. And so it's breaking it down. Which form of anxiety is it? Is it my story? Am I actually excited for this? And I'm believing that I'm scared, because that's silly. Am I incongruent? Am I not doing what I say I'm going to do? Or am I forecasting a future that doesn't even exist? And so when we can break down those components of anxiety, then bring it to the forefront with the person that I'm working with. What type of anxiety do you think it is? Oh, okay. I think this one's most accurate. And let's say it's incongruent. Let's say it's excitement, because I think that one's least known for folks. Now that we broke it down, let's write the story about it. So then we write the story. Now I'll tell you the process of it. So the story aspect, where it'd be step one, we title and write down the story. And we write down the story conversationally with proper grammar as if we're telling it to someone else. Another way I like to look at it is if you're viewing it on a movie screen, write down what you are seeing. So then we're keeping objectivity to the experience. So people are not in the story, they're taking themselves out of the story for seeing the story as is rather than how they feel it to be. So that's the first point of exposure. First, on that part, people writing down their stories, writing down their thoughts, they're already ahead of the game because folks aren't doing this. They're keeping their stories up here, up in their head. And what happens is that it keeps it infinite. It's always there. It's always big. And one of my favorite things when I'm working with folks is, oh, I got a lot of stories that I can work on. Oh, they're huge stories. And when people write them down, they're a lot smaller than they believe it to be. So that's a step one. So write it down. And then step two is to read it out loud. So that second point of exposure. Reading out loud, many folks will just read and they'll hold the air or they'll hold their breath high and tight in the chest. High and tight, good to fight. Low and slow, good to flow. Now what happens there is when people are reading, they'll feel the emotions come up as if it's happening. So they'll feel the emotions come up as if it's happening. And then sometimes folks will read a little bit faster. So they'll say, once upon a time back in the day when I was 6 years old and I went off jump and blah, 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 blah. So they have motor mouth. So that's step two is writing it out, reading it. Step three, to counter the motor mouth, is to read it 30% slower or 70% average talking speed. Now this slows down the tempo and forces breath in. So as the emotions are coming up, they'll just get a sigh in. It'll just happen automatically. And so what this does is that it helps process the emotions. Now step four, is where we read and breathe. So at every period, the occasional comma, and sometimes and, insert a breath. Once upon a time when I was 6 years old, I was in the living room with my brother, my mom, and my dad. This is the day they were telling my brother and I, they were getting a divorce. And it pushes the emotions through. When we create that objectivity, we're no longer stuck in the story. We're not stuck in the suck. We create objectivity, and by processing the emotions, then any of the anxieties, the fears, the depressive moments, those experiences decrease. And what happens is that people feel, which for some folks, for myself as well, it's freaky because it goes from a cluttered mind to an uncluttered mind. And what happens is you feel a state of equanimity, of balance, of an expansive mind and heart. And what happens is we see the story not from how we felt it, we see the story as the truth of it. And so let's say for the exact same example, for the incongruence or for the excitement, what meaning do you take from this story? I'm actually pumped about doing this. I don't even know why I was fearful of it. And so it just goes away. And so I think the thing that's really interesting with this as well is that folks perceive their own pain to be far, I don't want to say superior, because then it's going into like trauma and drama bonding. People perceive their pain to be more painful than every other person's pain. And so with this particular practice, it's removing the pain entirely and then going from a place of peace, which is pretty cool. Yeah.
What message do you want to leave our listeners with, especially those who are feeling stuck and just unsure how to move forward with life?
Can you say the question one more time? I want to make sure I get a real good answer.
What message would you like to leave our listeners with who are feeling stuck or are unsure how to move forward with life?
Every person who's ever accomplished anyone great has felt stuck or unsure. The difference between the folks that have gotten to where they want to go and not is a willingness to explore the unknown, or as I like to say it, to engulf the unknown with a relentless fury. Because the unknown may be unknown to us, however, we are also unknown to the unknown. So if we can become known, then there's nothing unknown. So the more we know, the less unknown there is. And that is done by exploration. We don't know what a forest has or a mountain has or a valley has until it's explored. And as we explore, we become more sure and we become less stuck. So stuck is super simple. Stuck is just staying in one spot, not exploring. So we can explore and be unsure and develop certainty over time. And I would also say just one point that I like to reference is keep up the kindness. And I like to say that keep up the kindness is important because kindness is not a feeling, it is a practice. And being kind to others and being kind to oneself is not something you pay for. It's a way that you behave. It's not something that you feel that is given to you. It is something that you give first and it's reciprocated to you. Kindness comes from the person first. And then as a side effect, other people are kind to us. Yeah. And then, yeah, that's a good one. I like that. That would be my go on that one. And then out of curiosity, because that sounded close to a final question for a podcast. Are we close to it?
Yeah, this is where I wrap up.
Is it okay if I talk about LLC really quick on that one?
I'm going to give you a chance when I make a statement. I'm going to say that's your last bit. So you pitch whatever you want to pitch.
Perfect.
So we'll take it from here again. Editors. Kyle, listening to your story, who you used to be, the conscious decision that you made to become who you want to be, it is clear how big your heart is. And with a big heart comes a lot of feelings. And I guess your message, if I understand it, is telling people through your own journey that it's okay to have these feelings. And just because we have certain feelings about ourselves that we like or don't like, what matters most is we must take just one step at a time forward every single day, making conscious decisions to become a better version of ourselves. And your life is testimony of one's ability to be able to do that. And there is pride in working on oneself. While there is pride, also just being who we are, because that's what makes us special. So the love that you bring to the world, the kindness that you bring to the world, the kindness that you show to others really tells us how special you really are and how much of a vision you have to make this world a wonderful place to be in. Any last words for our audience members about you, about your work, anything that you have to offer?
First and foremost, dude, you hit the feels good on that one. I felt every word of that, and I receive it. Thank you. I receive it. I'll talk about the practice, the NLSE, really quick because it's broken down pretty simple. So, neuro-linguistic somatic experience broken down. Neuro being of the mind, and in particular, mindset. And I define mindset as the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves or our opinion of ourselves. So we can have our mindset and we can think higher of ourselves or lesser of ourselves. And with this practical definition of mindset, we can adjust accordingly. So if we're thinking lesser of ourselves, do things to get us to think higher of ourselves. If we're thinking higher of ourselves, then we can maintain it. However, I like to go with a nice little neutrality. So I don't like to think too high of myself, or I don't like to think too low of myself. I like to be in the Goldilocks zone of just right. So that's neuro. Linguistic, being language, the words we say, think, write, and how we breathe. So word story, or how we, with the words aspect, a fun one that I like to think of, this goes into a little bit of the woo, the word abracadabra. What do you think of when I say abracadabra, Mark?
Magic.
Yeah. Abracadabra is an ancient language. It's Aramaic. For a reference point, it would have been Jesus' language back in the day. That's how long it goes back. And abracadabra, translated to English, means with my word, I create. With my word, I influence. So the words we think, say, and write are going to impact our perception and how we frame reality around us, and is also going to train our reticular activating system, our subconscious, to look out for evidence to support our frame. So whether we think higher or lesser of ourselves, we're going to look for evidence to support both, whichever one we want to focus on more. And how breath ties into that, breath is the language of the body. I said it earlier, if we're breathing high and tight, we're good to fight. If we're breathing low and slow, we're good to flow. So let's say we go into a public area and consciously we're all good. However, we feel like our heart or our breath rate has increased. So then we can take a second and be like, whoa, okay, body, what is it that you want me to be aware of right now? Or is there something that's actually made up? So for example, when you have that feeling, you don't have a good vibe about a place that you're going into, and you're just like, I don't know why, I just don't want to go in there. Totally reasonable. Don't go in there. Listen to that intuition and listen to that rate. And then the other part of that is the breath is increasing due to a story. So let's say it's excitement, but we perceive it as anxiety. Could be either or. We're going on stage to be able to present on something. We're getting a little worked up. This is excitement. Elevated heart rate, elevated breath rate. Totally makes sense. In both of those, we can take a moment and we can down-regulate the body. We can remind the body that it's safe, that it is not under threat, and that is just something that it's programmed on. It's okay. And so from there, we down-regulate the breath. And so I like to think of the breath as a way of being a thermostat rather than a thermometer. Rather than reacting to the external or internal stimuli like a thermometer, we can respond like a thermostat where we can adjust our internal temperature to our liking despite what's going on outside. And so that's the power of the breath and how the breath works as language. On the words part as well, how in fitness, There's food, where all food has macronutrients, carbs, fats, and proteins. These macronutrients are the building blocks of the body. These are what encourage growth and development. The higher quality foods, the higher quality results. Simple as that. Lower quality foods, lower quality results. Our words are the ethereal macronutrients of the mind. If we feed our mind quality words, we're going to have quality thoughts. If we feed our mind shit words, we're going to have shit thoughts. And so when we have ourselves I'll call it like a narrative diet or a word diet, where we could remove soft talk in support of solid talk. So an example of that would be, I might make it to the party for 5 p.m. I should make it to the party for 5 p.m. I could make it to the party 5 p.m. I might be at the party for 5 p.m. I want to make it to the party for 5 p.m. Remove all of those and say, I'll be at the party at 5 p.m. So that'll change it, where we take these ambiguous soft talk words and then we replace it. Actually, we don't even replace it. We remove the soft talk. We have only solid talk. And what this actually does is that it microdoses decisions. So we microdose good quality decisions. So if we trust ourselves to make really good small decisions, we're going to trust ourselves more to make the big decisions. However, it starts small with the microdosing decisions. And that's, in my opinion, removing soft talk, because then we're not ambiguous, we're decisive. So that's language. And then somatic for the NLSE. Somatic, soma, meaning of the body. And that's not just the physical body, it's the emotional body. So the physical body, it has the intelligence that it can heal itself. We cut our finger, it's going to recover. So we don't need to, it's a passive activity. For the emotional body, it's timeless. What happened when we were kids still can live in our emotional body. So that's what people experience when it's like a trauma, or when they get triggered. It's the emotions they feel that are of a similar theme to the story they experienced back in the day. And so those same feelings come up, and so people react the exact same way, even if it's 20 years into the future. So with the physical body, the energetic body, the words, and our breath, then we are allowing ourselves to process those unmetabolized emotions by going into the stories and processing those emotions, allowing ourselves to rid ourselves of that trauma blanket in order to be healed. And I say healed, and I emphasize it because people are always in the process of healing. However, how long does the process of healing really have to take? People will prolong the healing. So it's like, instead of wearing a trauma blanket, you're more like wearing a trauma vest. So it's not as much material, but it's a little bit less, and you are helping yourself, but you're going slower instead of quicker. I prefer quicker rather than slower with this particular case. And when we alleviate the emotional body of the pent-up stories, the emotions that are like lodged in there, then we allow the energy to flow. And that's when folks have an openness, they feel abundance, they feel serenity, they feel presence. And a couple times during sessions someone has said, I feel like open. I feel like, holy shit. And I like to say, like, welcome to abundance. This is open for everybody. And so that's always a fun one, because people have a new reference point. They have a reference point, oh, it's abundance. And so in saying all that, the E, experience for NLSE, is that it happens fast. It happens real time. And so my intention with the people that I work with, or the folks that I work with, or the businesses that I work with, is to collect as many ahas as possible. So as many of those pattern interrupts. And that takes the experience where they can have a trauma for 20 years. And it could be, I've worked with varying degrees of trauma. Or I'll say stories. I don't like saying trauma. I'll just say stories, because stories are experiences, memories, so on. And so varying degrees. And then I see tears often. I see a lot of crying in my line of work, and it's tears of joy more often than it is tears of sadness. But those are alleviations. That's just a physiological release. So the experience is that there's a lot of ahas collected in a very short period of time. And I would put this practice up against any other practice. And not only that, because I believe that it's not this or that, I have the frame of this and that, because I have a very collaborative mind. I want for everyone to be able to be sovereign savage servants in their own right, in their own manner, whatever that subjectively means to them. And by being able to bring that to the forefront, being able to allow folks to have that openness, that abundance, and to be able to live with themselves, for themselves, and then as a side effect, for others and for others as a whole, it makes it a lot easier to alleviate those painful stories, to breathe. That last little bit was a little bit of a tangent, dude.
It's all good. Thank you so much for being on the show. I'll talk to you soon.
For sure.
We'll end cut here. How was your experience?
Oh, dude, your questions are so sweet. Oh, I like it. What I think of your questions, when you're asking the questions, because you can hear in tonality when people are speaking, and I can hear the difference between an intuitive question and a thought question. And the questions that you had, to me, I sensed it was intuitive. There was just a wording component to it where you just pulled it out, and I was like, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's what I recognized after like the first couple of questions. I'm like, is this motherfucker's intuitively pulling questions? So I thought it was cool, man. You great questions, great interview, great chat. Good vibes.
You have something good at your hands. You have something really good at your hands. It's going to be interesting to see how you market it. How many clients are you signing up per month right now?
Per month, right now, I would probably say it's about on average three peeps
Okay.
per, and then presentations because I got a couple gigs for presentations, and it's in the sweet spot. So right now, my main focus for this phase is eyeballs and connection.
Okay.
So that's why I'm going on a podcast tour in order to get some more eyeballs.
What's the vision for the company?
The vision for the company,
Yeah.
I'll go couples. Okay. I'll go big and then I'll go small.
I have no interest in small. Go for big.
My big one. So I have a personal one, and my personal one is to qualify or be nominated for an honorary degree for my work in contributing to society. So we have the U of A here, the University of Alberta, and it's a really well-known university for psychology and work in that manner, and worldwide too. We have peeps all over, and they have an honorary graduate part where I meet the qualifications of the other part. I don't go to school there. I don't work there. And I'm not a government person there. And then it's being a good contribution to society. So that's my personal one, which ties into another part. For a broader part, I have a philosophy that if you take care of the city, it takes care of you. And I believe that if people cared about the city that they lived in more, the city would do more for them. So my goal with that is to integrate NLSE with not intervention, integrating. So let's say it was like, I call it homeless to hopeful. So homeless folks that have that openness, desirability, pain threshold. They go through their addictions treatment, they do the process. And I find that the issue that I have is in between graduating the program and wherever else they end up, there's not an integration phase. So it's, oh, you've gone through it and then see ya. And I don't like that. And so I want to be the intermediary for someone that goes from homeless, working on their words, stories, and breath, alleviating themselves of huge traumas or experiences, stories. And then from there, there's another friend of mine. He does the story work aspects similar to I do. However, he does it with blue collar workers, and he's an insane welder, like so good. So I want to collaborate with him to be able to teach these folks that went from rags to intermediate, like in the middle of rags to riches. And I want to introduce trade work to these homeless folk because there's also a decline in trade work happening in Canada, at least. I'm not sure what's like in the States. So there's a decrease in welders, plumbers, refrigerator work, oil rig work here in Alberta up north. Oh yeah, you're in Texas. You would know all about that. Which Alberta's northern Texas, basically. And Texas is northern or southern Edmonton or Alberta. And and so there's more jobs available. So I want to take the folks that don't have a job, that don't have a spot, to be able to alleviate themselves of their past identity, to step into this new identity with a high paying, good quality job with a trade. That way they can contribute to society and then choose to do whatever they want past that point. And then from another point, it's developing the identity of businesses as well as developing the subjective identities of the individuals within that objective business. So the micro into the macro. And then I also develop systems where it goes into a goal, story, target, and everyone's in alignment. And when it comes to businesses here in Edmonton, I really want to emphasize efficiency over time. So I want to introduce, once a business has like got things flowing and there's like a flow to it, and there's data backed information saying like we are improving X amount over X amount of time, then I want to decrease the overall work. So keep the same pay, introduce 3-day weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 10 to 4, 10 to 4, 10 to 4, 10 to 4. And clock, everybody goes in to decide on or to communicate what they're working on and what they're going to get done by the end of the day, and then what they're going to get done by the end of the week. If they finish those before the Friday, they can go ahead and have the 3-day weekend. If they still have things to do, then they can go in. So I want to make Friday an option. Keep the pay the same. So I want to increase efficiency, maintain pay, increase enjoyability, as well as decrease the time it takes to have projects done.
Interesting. Let me stop